Have you ever noticed that your greatest breakthroughs in prosperity came not when everything was flowing smoothly, but when you finally stopped fighting against what seemed to be going wrong, and instead blessed it as part of your path to abundance? There is something profound that Florence Scovel Shinn discovered about the nature of true prosperity that goes against everything we have been taught about manifesting wealth and abundance. She learned that when we bless both the light and the shadow in our financial life, when we say yes to both the expansion and the contraction, we become channels for a type of prosperity that is unshakable because it does not depend on circumstances being perfect. Tonight, as you rest and allow these words to enter the deepest parts of your consciousness, you are going to receive a teaching that will transform how you relate to money, challenges, setbacks, and apparent failures. You can close your eyes now, and everything that needs to happen will happen while you rest. Your subconscious mind is infinitely more powerful than your thinking mind, and it knows how to reorganize your entire relationship with abundance while you sleep. What I am about to share with you came through Florence Scovel Shinn in the early 1900s, when she was working with a woman who had been struggling for years to manifest financial stability. This woman had tried every technique, every affirmation, every visualization, and nothing seemed to work. She would have temporary improvements followed by setbacks that seemed to erase all her progress. Florence gave her one instruction that changed everything, and tonight you will receive this same instruction, and it will work for you, even if you fall asleep while listening, because the part of you that needs to hear this never sleeps. Her name was Eleanor, and she was 62 years old when she first came to see Florence Scovel Shinn in her small office on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, and the air outside was crisp with the first hint of winter. Eleanor had taken the train in from Connecticut, where she had been living in the same house for 37 years, the house where she and her husband had raised their 3 children and built what she thought was a secure life. Eleanor was wearing a navy blue wool coat that had seen better days, and her hands trembled slightly as she removed her gloves. The trembling was not from the cold, but from the anxiety that had been her constant companion for the past 8 months since everything in her life had begun to unravel. She sat in the wooden chair across from Florence's desk, and the afternoon light streaming through the window caught the silver in her hair, making her look older than her 62 years. Florence noticed that Eleanor's eyes held a particular kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes not from physical tiredness, but from fighting against life for too long. Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper when she began to speak, and she told Florence about how her husband's business, the small manufacturing company they had built together over nearly 4 decades, was now on the verge of bankruptcy. The company that had supported their family and employed 23 people was drowning in debt after a series of contracts fell through, and their main competitor had undercut them on several major accounts. Eleanor described how she had been praying and affirming for months, trying to visualize their business prospering again. But instead of improvement, things kept getting worse. They had already mortgaged their house to keep the business afloat, and now the bank was threatening foreclosure. Their adult children, who had always looked to them for support, were now offering to help financially, but Eleanor could see the strain this was putting on their own families. The shame of potentially losing everything they had worked for was eating away at her, and she confessed to Florence that she had been having thoughts of ending her life rather than face the humiliation of losing their home and business. What made Eleanor's situation even more painful was that she had been studying metaphysical principles for years and felt like she was failing at the very teachings that were supposed to save her. She had been affirming abundance and trying to maintain positive thoughts, but every time she looked at their financial statements or received another threatening letter from creditors, her faith would crumble. She told Florence that she felt like she was in a spiritual war, fighting against the evidence of her senses while trying to maintain belief in prosperity that seemed further away each day. Florence listened to Eleanor's story with the deep compassion that had made her such an effective teacher. And then she asked Eleanor a question that would change everything. She asked Eleanor if she had ever considered that perhaps she was supposed to bless the financial crisis instead of fighting against it. Eleanor looked at Florence as if she had suggested something blasphemous. How could she bless the very thing that was destroying her life? Florence explained to Eleanor that what we resist persists, and what we bless flows through us and transforms. She told Eleanor that the financial crisis was not her enemy, but her teacher, and that it was showing her where she had been trying to control outcomes instead of trusting the divine plan. Florence gave Eleanor a specific instruction that seemed impossible, but that Eleanor agreed to try because she had nothing left to lose. The instruction was this: every morning upon waking and every evening before sleep, Eleanor was to place her hands on her heart and say these exact words with complete sincerity: I bless this financial crisis as my pathway to greater prosperity, and I thank it for showing me where I have been trying to force instead of flow. Florence told Eleanor that she must say these words even when, and especially when, they felt completely untrue, because the blessing would gradually dissolve her resistance and open her to receive guidance from a higher source. Eleanor left Florence's office that Tuesday afternoon with instructions to practice this blessing for exactly 48 hours and to notice what shifted in her external circumstances during that time. Florence warned Eleanor that the first day might bring up even more fear and resistance because the ego mind fights against blessing what it perceives as negative, but if Eleanor could stay with the practice, something would shift by the end of the second day. Eleanor took the train home that evening, and as she sat looking out the window at the darkening landscape, she began to practice the blessing Florence had given her. The words felt foreign in her mouth, and her mind immediately began to argue against them, but she continued to repeat them softly under her breath. That first night, Eleanor slept more deeply than she had in months, despite the fact that she was blessing the very crisis that had been keeping her awake. The next morning, Wednesday, October 24th, at exactly 7:15, Eleanor woke before her alarm, and the first thing she did was place her hands on her heart and speak the blessing aloud. As she spoke the words, she noticed something subtle but significant happening in her body. The chronic tension she had been carrying in her chest and shoulders began to soften slightly, and for the first time in months, she took a full deep breath without effort. Throughout that Wednesday, Eleanor continued to practice the blessing every few hours, and each time she noticed a small shift in her internal state. She still felt afraid about their financial situation, but underneath the fear, there was beginning to emerge a strange sense of peace, a feeling that perhaps everything was unfolding exactly as it needed to. That evening, when she and her husband sat down to review their latest financial statements, instead of falling into their usual pattern of worry and argument, Eleanor found herself able to look at the numbers with a kind of detached clarity she had never experienced before. Thursday, October 25th, was when the miracle began to manifest in the external world. At 10:30 that morning, Eleanor received a phone call that would change everything. The call was from Marcus Richardson, a man she had not spoken to in over 15 years. Marcus had been her husband's business partner in the very early days before they had gone separate ways to build their own companies. Marcus explained that he had been thinking about Eleanor and her husband for weeks and had finally decided to reach out. What Marcus told Eleanor seemed too good to be true, but Eleanor found herself receiving his words with a calm certainty that this was exactly what she had been blessing into existence. Marcus explained that his own manufacturing company had grown substantially over the years, and he was now looking to acquire smaller companies that he could integrate into his operations. He had always regretted the way things had ended between him and Eleanor's husband, and wanted to make an offer that would allow them to maintain their dignity while saving their business. The offer that Marcus presented was beyond anything Eleanor could have imagined when she had been trying to force a solution through willpower and positive thinking. Marcus offered to buy their company for an amount that would not only pay off all their debts, but would also provide them with enough money to pay off their house and have a substantial nest egg for retirement. Additionally, Marcus wanted Eleanor's husband to stay on as a consultant for 2 years at a salary that was higher than what he had been paying himself when the business was successful. But the most remarkable part of Marcus's offer was what he said about the timing. He told Eleanor that he had been planning this acquisition for months, but something had been holding him back from making the call until exactly 2 days ago, when he suddenly felt compelled to reach out. 2 days ago was the exact moment when Eleanor had first spoken the blessing in Florence Scovel Shinn's office. As Eleanor listened to Marcus describe his offer, she felt something profound shifting inside her understanding of how prosperity actually works. She realized that all the months she had spent trying to save their business through force and positive thinking had actually been blocking the very solution that the universe had been preparing for them. The financial crisis that she had been fighting against had been the exact catalyst needed to bring Marcus back into their lives with an offer that was far better than anything they could have created on their own. When Eleanor hung up the phone that Thursday morning at exactly 11:47, she fell to her knees in her kitchen and wept tears of gratitude and relief. But more than relief, what she felt was a profound recognition that the universe had been orchestrating this solution all along, and that her resistance to the crisis had been the only thing preventing her from receiving it sooner. The blessing practice had not created the miracle, it had simply dissolved her resistance so that the miracle that was already prepared could flow into her experience. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor continued to practice blessing both the light and the shadow in every area of her life, and she discovered that this principle worked not only for financial matters, but for health, relationships, and every other challenge she encountered. She realized that Florence Scovel Shinn had given her the key to a type of prosperity that could never be taken away, because it was based not on avoiding difficulties, but on blessing them as pathways to greater good. If this teaching resonates with you, and if you feel you were guided here, then touch the subscribe button now. And it is not for me, but it is so that you receive each new teaching from Florence Scovel Shinn at the exact moment your soul needs it. When you subscribe, you join thousands of souls around the world who are practicing these principles and creating a collective field of prosperity consciousness that benefits everyone. And in the comments, write only 3 words, which are, "I am receiving now," and this is not an affirmation but a decree. And when you write these words, you activate collective witness, and thousands of souls write these same words, and the field strengthens for everyone. If you choose not to do this right now, that is perfectly fine, and your path is your own, but know that this is the moment of greatest power, so do it if you feel aligned. Now you can relax completely, and you do not need to do anything else. Everything I will share enters you while you rest, and your subconscious is awake, and it absorbs every word. If you fall asleep in the middle, that is perfect, because when you wake, the seed will already be planted and growing in the fertile soil of your deeper mind. Your subconscious knows how to reorganize your entire relationship with prosperity while you sleep, and it does not need your conscious mind to understand or figure out how this will happen. Simply allow these teachings to flow into you like water soaking into dry earth, and trust that everything you need to receive will be received even if you are sleeping soundly when the words are spoken. Florence Scovel Shinn was born in 1860 in Philadelphia into a world that was very different from ours. Yet the spiritual principles she discovered are even more relevant today than they were in her time. She lived during an era when women were not expected to be spiritual teachers or business advisors. Yet she became one of the most influential metaphysical instructors of her generation because she discovered something about the nature of prosperity that no one else was teaching. Most spiritual teachers of her time were focused on positive thinking and affirming only good things. But Florence discovered through her own experience and through working with hundreds of students that this approach was incomplete and sometimes even counterproductive. She realized that when we try to affirm abundance while simultaneously resisting the appearance of lack, we create an internal war that actually blocks the flow of prosperity into our lives. The central principle that made Florence Scovel Shinn's work so effective was her understanding that divine law operates through our wholehearted acceptance of whatever is appearing in our experience. She taught that when we bless both the light and the shadow, in our financial life we align ourselves with a higher order of manifestation that does not depend on our circumstances being perfect before we can receive abundance. This principle came to Florence through her own financial struggles in the early days of her teaching career, when she was barely making enough money to support herself despite her deep knowledge of metaphysical principles. She had been affirming prosperity for months and visualizing abundance, but her financial situation continued to deteriorate until she was facing eviction from her small apartment in New York City. One evening, as Florence sat in her apartment looking at a pile of unpaid bills, she had what she later described as a moment of divine revelation. Instead of continuing to fight against her financial difficulties, she suddenly felt guided to place her hands on the bills and bless them as messengers from the divine. This felt completely contrary to everything she had been taught about positive thinking, but something inside her knew that this was the breakthrough she had been seeking. Florence began to practice blessing her financial challenges every morning and evening, and within days, she noticed a profound shift in her internal state. The anxiety and fear that had been her constant companions began to dissolve, and in their place arose a deep sense of trust that everything was unfolding perfectly according to divine plan. More importantly, Florence began to receive insights and guidance about how to structure her teaching work in ways that would serve more people while also providing her with sustainable income. The external manifestation of Florence's new approach to prosperity came in the form of opportunities that she never could have imagined while she was focused on trying to solve her financial problems through willpower. A wealthy benefactor who had heard about her work offered to sponsor a series of lectures, and a publisher approached her about writing a book that would eventually become one of the most influential metaphysical texts of the 20th century. But what Florence realized was most significant about this experience was not the external changes, but the internal transformation that had occurred through blessing what she had previously been resisting. She discovered that when we fight against our circumstances, we actually give them power over us. But when we bless them, we reclaim our spiritual authority and align ourselves with forces that are infinitely more intelligent than our limited human perspective. This insight became the foundation of Florence's teaching about what she called the law of non-resistance, which she explained as our ability to flow with divine currents instead of swimming against them. She taught that prosperity is not something we create through force or positive thinking, but something we allow by removing the internal obstacles that block its natural flow into our lives. Florence's approach was revolutionary because it acknowledged that difficult circumstances are not mistakes or punishments, but opportunities for spiritual growth and deeper alignment with divine will. She taught her students that when they blessed their financial challenges, they were not being passive or resigned, but were actually accessing a higher level of spiritual power that could transform any situation from within. The metaphysical mechanism that Florence discovered works like this. When we resist what is appearing in our experience, we create energetic friction that blocks the flow of new possibilities into our lives. But when we bless what is appearing, we dissolve that friction and open ourselves to receive guidance, inspiration, and opportunities that we could never have accessed while we were fighting against our circumstances. Florence often used the metaphor of a river to explain this principle to her students. She would say that when we try to swim upstream against the current of our circumstances, we exhaust ourselves and make no progress. But when we turn around and flow with the current, we are carried effortlessly toward our destination, even if we cannot see where the river is taking us. This teaching is particularly powerful for your subconscious mind to absorb while you sleep, because during sleep, your conscious resistance naturally relaxes, and your deeper mind can integrate new patterns of thinking and being without interference from your analytical mind. While you rest tonight, your subconscious is already beginning to reorganize your relationship with financial challenges according to the principle of blessing rather than resisting. Many people make the mistake of thinking that blessing their financial difficulties means they are giving up or accepting defeat. But Florence taught that blessing is actually the highest form of spiritual action, because it aligns us with divine intelligence, which always knows the perfect solution to every problem. When we bless our challenges, we are not saying we want them to continue, but rather that we trust them to lead us to something better than what we could have created through our own limited understanding. You can recognize when this principle is beginning to work in your life because you will notice a shift from anxiety and struggle to curiosity and trust, even when your external circumstances have not yet changed. You will find yourself asking not, "How can I fix this?" but "What is this situation trying to teach me?" And from that place of receptivity, new solutions and opportunities will begin to appear. The reason Florence Scovel Shin students experienced such dramatic transformations was not because they learned to think more positively, but because they learned to embrace the totality of their experience, including the parts that seemed negative or unwanted. This wholehearted acceptance created an inner unity that became a magnet for miracles and manifestations that seemed to come from beyond the realm of ordinary cause and effect. As you continue to rest and allow these words to penetrate the deepest levels of your consciousness, your own capacity for blessing, both light and shadow is being activated and strengthened. You do not need to understand how this works or figure out how to apply it, because the principle itself is now working through you, reorganizing your energy field and preparing new channels for prosperity to flow into your life. Tomorrow when you wake, you may find yourself naturally responding to financial challenges with curiosity rather than fear. And this shift in your internal response will immediately begin to attract different external experiences. The universe responds not to what we say we want, but to who we are being, and when we become someone who blesses rather than resists, we become a magnet for abundance in all its forms. There is a profound difference between accepting something and truly blessing it, and this difference is what determines whether we remain stuck in our circumstances or use them as stepping stones to greater prosperity. Florence Scovel Shin discovered that acceptance alone is not enough to transform our experience, because acceptance can still carry subtle resistance or resentment. True blessing requires what she called a complete yes to whatever is appearing in our lives, even when, and especially when, we cannot understand why it is happening. The complete yes that Florence taught is not passive resignation, but an active alignment with divine intelligence that knows how to use every experience for our highest good. When we say a complete yes to our financial challenges, we are not saying we want them to continue forever, but rather that we trust them to be perfect catalysts for our spiritual and material evolution. This principle transformed the life of a man named Raymond, who was 58 years old when he lost his executive position at a manufacturing company where he had worked for 23 years. Raymond had always prided himself on being a positive person, and when he first lost his job, he tried to maintain optimism and confidence that he would quickly find another position at his level of experience and compensation. Raymond lived in a comfortable suburb of Detroit with his wife Martha in a house they had owned for 18 years. They had 2 adult children who were both married with children of their own, and Raymond had been looking forward to being able to help his grandchildren with college expenses when the time came. The loss of his job at age 58 felt devastating, not only because of the immediate financial impact, but because Raymond realized that finding another executive position at his age would be extremely difficult. For the first 3 months after losing his job, Raymond applied to dozens of positions and had several interviews, but nothing materialized into an offer. Each rejection letter or polite phone call saying they had chosen another candidate felt like another blow to his self-worth, and his confidence began to erode despite his efforts to stay positive. Raymond's wife Martha was supportive, but he could see the worry in her eyes when she thought he was not looking, and this added to his feeling of having failed as a provider and protector for his family. By the 4th month, Raymond was becoming desperate and began applying for positions that were significantly below his previous level, both in terms of responsibility and compensation. He was willing to take a substantial pay cut just to have some income coming in, but even these lower-level positions seemed to go to younger candidates. Raymond began to feel invisible and irrelevant, as if his decades of experience meant nothing in a rapidly changing economy. It was during this darkest period that Raymond's sister gave him a book by Florence Scovel Shinn, and he read about the principle of blessing rather than resisting challenging circumstances. At first, Raymond thought this idea was ridiculous, because how could blessing his unemployment possibly help him find a job? But he was desperate enough to try anything and decided to experiment with the practice for 1 week to see what would happen. Raymond began each morning at exactly 6:30 by sitting in his favorite chair in their living room and speaking these words aloud. "I bless my unemployment as a perfect pathway to my highest good, and I give thanks for this opportunity to discover something new about my purpose and capabilities." The first few times he spoke these words, they felt completely false, and his mind immediately protested. But Raymond continued the practice because he had promised himself he would try it for 7 full days. On the 3rd day of this practice, something interesting began to happen. Raymond noticed that instead of waking up with the familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach, he felt curious about what the day might bring. He still did not have any job prospects, but somehow the unemployment began to feel less like a disaster and more like an adventure. Raymond found himself paying attention to things he had never noticed before during his busy executive years, like the way morning light fell across their kitchen table and the sound of birds singing in their backyard. By the end of the first week, Raymond had experienced such a shift in his internal state that he decided to continue the blessing practice indefinitely. He began to see his unemployment not as a problem to be solved, but as an opportunity to explore aspects of himself that had been dormant during his corporate career. Raymond had always been interested in woodworking, but had never had time to pursue it seriously. And now he began spending hours in his garage workshop, creating furniture and decorative pieces. What Raymond discovered during those hours in his workshop was that he had a natural talent for woodworking that went far beyond hobby level. He found himself designing and creating pieces that were truly artistic, and he began to research the market for custom handmade furniture. The more Raymond explored this possibility, the more excited he became about the idea of starting his own woodworking business instead of trying to find another corporate job. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in February when Raymond was working on a dining room table made from reclaimed barnwood. A neighbor who was walking her dog stopped to admire the piece through the open garage door and asked if Raymond might be interested in making a similar table for her daughter who was getting married in the spring. When Raymond quoted her a price that he thought was probably too high, she immediately said yes and asked if he could also make matching chairs. That single conversation led to 3 more commissioned pieces, and Raymond realized that he could potentially earn more money as a custom furniture maker than he had been making in his corporate job. More importantly, he would be doing work that he truly loved instead of work that felt like obligation. Within 6 months, Raymond had more orders than he could handle and was considering hiring an assistant to help with the growing demand for his pieces. The transformation in Raymond's life came not from trying to force his way back into the corporate world, but from blessing his unemployment so completely that it became a doorway to discovering his true calling. Raymond often reflected that if he had found another executive job quickly, he never would have discovered his artistic abilities or experienced the deep satisfaction of creating beautiful things with his hands. Florence Scovel. Shin taught that every apparent setback contains the seed of an equal or greater benefit, but we can only access that benefit when we stop fighting against the setback and start blessing it as a perfect part of our journey. The complete yes that Raymond gave to his unemployment allowed him to receive the gift that was hidden within what initially appeared to be a catastrophe. This teaching is particularly powerful to absorb while you sleep, because during sleep, your conscious mind stops trying to figure out how things should be different, and your subconscious can integrate new ways of responding to challenging circumstances. Your deeper mind already knows that every experience contains hidden gifts and blessings, and as you rest tonight, that knowing is being activated and strengthened. When you practice giving a complete yes to whatever is appearing in your financial life, you are not being passive or defeated, but are actually accessing the highest level of spiritual intelligence that knows how to transform any situation from within. The yes opens you to receive guidance and opportunities that you could never have discovered while you were focused on resisting your circumstances. Many people struggle with this practice because they confuse blessing their challenges with wanting them to continue. But Florence taught that blessing actually accelerates the transformation of difficult circumstances because it removes the energetic resistance that keeps us stuck in unwanted patterns. When we say yes to what is, we create space for what wants to emerge, and that emergence is always in the direction of greater good. Tomorrow when you wake, you may find yourself naturally curious about what gifts are hidden within any financial challenges you are currently experiencing. And this curiosity will open doorways to solutions and opportunities that were invisible to you while you were fighting against your circumstances. The complete yes is already working through you, reorganizing your energy field and preparing you to receive prosperity in ways you never could have imagined. The most profound shift that occurs when we begin to bless both light and shadow in our financial life is a transformation of identity from someone who receives only when conditions are perfect to someone who receives from all directions and in all circumstances. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that our identity, our fundamental sense of who we are, determines what we can receive far more than our actions or affirmations ever could. Most people have been conditioned to believe that they can only prosper when everything is going well in their lives, but this limited identity keeps them trapped in cycles of feast and famine because they resist half of their human experience. The identity that Florence discovered allows for what she called divine equilibrium, where we become channels for abundance that flows through us, whether we are experiencing expansion or contraction. This transformed identity emerged beautifully in the life of a woman named Vivian, who was 64 years old when she found herself facing pressure from her 3 adult children to sell the family home and move into a smaller apartment or assisted living facility. Vivian had been widowed for 4 years, and while she was managing well on her own, her children worried about her living alone in the large house where she and her husband had raised their family for 31 years. Vivian lived in a gracious colonial-style home in a quiet neighborhood outside of Portland, Oregon, surrounded by oak trees that her husband had planted when they first moved there in 1992. The house held so many memories that the thought of leaving felt like losing another piece of her husband and the life they had built together. But Vivian was also aware that maintaining the house was becoming more challenging and expensive, and she could understand her children's concerns about her safety and financial security. The pressure from her children intensified when Vivian's furnace needed to be replaced in early November at a cost of $4,800. Her son Michael, who was 43 and worked as an accountant, sat her down at her kitchen table and showed her calculations, proving that the monthly costs of maintaining the house were consuming too large a percentage of her fixed income. He argued that if she sold the house now while the market was strong, she could pay cash for a nice apartment and invest the remaining money to provide additional income for her retirement years. Vivian's daughter Susan, who was 39 and had always been the family peacemaker, suggested that they look at several assisted living communities that offered different levels of independence and support. Susan painted an appealing picture of communities where Vivian could have her own apartment but also have access to meals, social activities, and healthcare assistance if needed. Her youngest son David, who was 36, worried most about what would happen if Vivian fell or had a medical emergency while alone in the house. The rational arguments her children presented were sound, and Vivian could see that they came from love and genuine concern for her well-being. But every time she tried to imagine herself living anywhere other than the house she and Robert had shared, she felt something inside her rebel against the idea. The house was not just a place to live, but a repository of 31 years of memories, and she was not ready to let go of that connection to her life with Robert. It was during this period of internal conflict that Vivian discovered Florence Scovel Shinn's teaching about embracing both light and shadow as pathways to prosperity. Vivian had always considered herself a spiritual person, but most of her practice had focused on trying to maintain positive thoughts and avoid dwelling on difficulties. The idea that she could actually bless her financial concerns about maintaining the house while also blessing her desire to keep it felt revolutionary. Vivian began to practice what she called holding both truths, where she would acknowledge that her children's concerns were valid and that maintaining the house was challenging, while also honoring her deep desire to remain in the home she loved. Instead of trying to resolve this conflict through logic alone, Vivian began to bless both sides of the dilemma and ask for guidance about what would serve her highest good. The practice Vivian developed involved sitting in Robert's favorite chair each morning at 7:15 and speaking these words aloud. I bless my children's concerns, and I bless my desire to stay in this house, and I trust that divine intelligence knows the perfect solution that honors both my need for security and my need for connection to the life Robert and I built together. At first, this felt awkward because Vivian was accustomed to trying to choose one side or the other. But gradually, she began to experience a sense of peace in holding both truths simultaneously. After 3 weeks of this practice, Vivian began to receive what felt like divine guidance about practical solutions she had not previously considered. She realized that instead of seeing the house as a financial burden, she could explore ways to make it generate income while allowing her to continue living there. Vivian had always kept the house in excellent condition, and it was located in a neighborhood that was becoming increasingly popular with young professionals who worked in downtown Portland. The inspiration that came to Vivian was to convert the finished basement into a separate apartment that she could rent to a carefully screened tenant. The basement already had its own entrance and a 3/4 bathroom, and Vivian realized that with relatively modest renovations, she could create an attractive studio apartment that would provide monthly rental income while also giving her the comfort of having someone else in the house. When Vivian presented this idea to her children, their initial reaction was skepticism. But as they discussed the practical details, they began to see the wisdom of the plan. The rental income would more than cover the ongoing maintenance costs of the house, and would also provide Vivian with additional money for travel and other activities she wanted to pursue. Having a tenant would address their safety concerns while allowing Vivian to maintain her independence and stay connected to the home she loved. The renovation of the basement apartment cost $12,400, but Vivian was able to finance this through a home equity line of credit that would be easily covered by the rental income. Within 6 months, Vivian had found an ideal tenant, a 28-year-old nurse named Sarah, who worked night shifts at the nearby hospital and appreciated having a quiet place to sleep during the day. The monthly rental income of $1,600 not only covered all the house expenses, but also gave Vivian enough extra money to hire a landscaping service and a weekly house cleaning service that made maintaining the property much easier. More importantly, Vivian felt that she had honored both her practical needs and her emotional needs without having to sacrifice either one. The transformation in Vivian's identity through this experience was profound because she realized that she did not have to choose between security and authenticity, between being practical and being true to her heart. By blessing both sides of what had initially seemed like an impossible dilemma, Vivian had accessed a creative solution that was better than anything she could have imagined while she was trying to force a choice between two unsatisfactory options. Florence Scovel Shin taught that this type of creative solution becomes available when we embrace what she called divine equilibrium, where we stop seeing life as a series of either-or choices and start seeing it as a both-and reality where apparent opposites can be harmonized through higher wisdom. This equilibrium becomes our new identity as someone who receives from all directions rather than someone who can only prosper under perfect conditions. The identity of the divine balancer that emerges through blessing both light and shadow recognizes that every financial challenge contains creative potential and every apparent limitation can become a doorway to expanded prosperity. This identity trusts that divine intelligence is always working to create solutions that serve everyone involved, and that our role is not to figure out those solutions, but to bless all aspects of our experience so that the solutions can emerge. While you sleep tonight, your own identity is shifting from someone who needs circumstances to be perfect in order to prosper, to someone who can receive abundance through any experience, whether it appears positive or negative. Your subconscious mind is reorganizing your fundamental sense of who you are and what you are capable of receiving, and this transformation will manifest in your external experience as new opportunities and solutions that honor all aspects of your authentic desires. When you wake tomorrow, you may find yourself naturally thinking about financial challenges as creative opportunities rather than problems to be solved. And this shift in perspective will immediately begin to attract different experiences into your life. The identity of the divine balancer is already emerging within you, preparing you to receive prosperity that flows from your wholehearted embrace of everything life offers you. Florence Scovel Shinn made a startling discovery about the nature of prosperity that contradicted most conventional wisdom about success and abundance. She found that the very experiences we try most desperately to avoid our financial failures, losses, rejections, and setbacks, are often the most direct pathways to greater prosperity than we ever could have achieved through our original plans. This revelation came through working with hundreds of students who shared their stories of how apparent disasters had ultimately led to breakthroughs they never could have imagined while they were focused on avoiding difficulties. Florence began to teach that what we call shadows in our financial life are actually teachers in disguise, and that learning to recognize and bless these teachers was essential for accessing higher levels of abundance. The shadow teachers that Florence identified include rejection, which teaches us to refine our offerings and find our true audience; financial loss, which teaches us to release attachments that limit our receiving; failed investments, which teach us discernment and patience; delays, which teach us divine timing; setbacks, which teach us resilience; and unexpected expenses, which teach us to trust in an unlimited source of supply. This profound understanding transformed the life of a man named Franklin, who was 61 years old when he experienced what initially felt like the most devastating rejection of his professional career. Franklin had been operating a small automotive repair shop in his hometown of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, for 34 years, and had built a reputation for honest work and fair prices that earned him a loyal customer base and steady income that supported his family comfortably. Franklin's shop was located on a busy street near the center of town in a building he had purchased 15 years earlier when business was particularly good. The shop employed 4 mechanics besides Franklin himself, and they handled everything from routine oil changes to major engine repairs. Franklin took pride in the fact that customers often drove from neighboring towns to bring their vehicles to his shop because they trusted his expertise and appreciated his straightforward approach to pricing. The rejection that shattered Franklin's confidence came when he applied for a substantial business loan to expand his operation by purchasing the adjacent building and adding 2 more service bays along with state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment. Franklin had been planning this expansion for 3 years and had carefully saved money for the down payment while researching the best equipment and developing detailed business projections that showed how the expansion would increase revenue and profitability. Franklin's relationship with his bank went back 27 years, and he had never missed a payment on any loan or had any issues with his business accounts. The bank president had attended the same church as Franklin's family for over a decade and had often commented positively about Franklin's reputation in the community. When Franklin submitted his loan application, he was confident that approval would be routine, given his excellent credit history and the solid financial foundation of his business. The meeting with the loan committee was scheduled for a Thursday morning in March, and Franklin arrived wearing his best suit and carrying a leather folder containing all the documentation the bank had requested, including 3 years of tax returns, detailed financial projections, letters of support from major customers, and estimates from contractors for the renovation work. Franklin had even prepared a brief presentation explaining how the expansion would allow him to serve more customers while providing good jobs for 2 additional mechanics. The rejection came in the form of a polite but firm letter that Franklin received the following Tuesday afternoon. The letter explained that while Franklin's business had been profitable and his credit history was excellent, the loan committee felt that the automotive repair industry was facing too much uncertainty due to changes in vehicle technology and the increasing reliability of newer cars. The bank was concerned that demand for traditional repair services might decline over the next decade as more people chose to replace rather than repair older vehicles. Franklin read the rejection letter 3 times, standing in his office behind the service bays where he could hear his mechanics working on customers' cars. The sound of pneumatic tools and the familiar hum of activity that had always been comforting now felt somehow hollow and temporary. Franklin felt as if the bank had delivered a verdict not just on his loan application, but on the viability of his entire life's work. The emotional impact of the rejection was intensified by the fact that Franklin had already told his employees about the expansion plans and had even begun preliminary conversations with the 2 mechanics he hoped to hire. He felt embarrassed and defeated, having to explain that the expansion was no longer possible, and worried that his employees might begin looking for more secure positions at larger shops that seemed to have better prospects for growth. For 2 weeks after receiving the rejection, Franklin struggled with feelings of disappointment and uncertainty about the future of his business. He found himself questioning decisions he had made and wondering if the bank officials knew something about the industry that he had failed to recognize. The confidence and optimism that had always been Franklin's trademark began to erode as he worried that perhaps his business model was becoming obsolete. It was during this period of discouragement that Franklin's wife, Ruth, gave him a book by Florence Scovel, Shin, that she had borrowed from her sister. Ruth suggested that Franklin might find comfort in the spiritual principles the book described, particularly the idea that apparent setbacks often contain hidden blessings that only become visible when we stop fighting against unwanted circumstances. Franklin was initially skeptical about applying spiritual principles to business decisions, but he was desperate enough to try anything that might help him regain his sense of direction and purpose. He began to read about Florence's teaching, that rejection and disappointment are often divine protection, steering us away from paths that would not serve our highest good and toward opportunities that are aligned with a larger plan for our lives. The practice that Franklin adopted involved sitting quietly in his office each morning before the shop opened and speaking these words with as much sincerity as he could muster. "I bless this rejection as divine protection, and I give thanks that I am being guided toward something better than what I originally planned." At first, these words felt completely contrary to his natural reaction to the situation, but Franklin committed to practicing them for 30 days to see what would happen. By the end of the first week, Franklin noticed that his anger and disappointment were beginning to soften into curiosity about what the rejection might be protecting him from and what opportunities might be emerging that he had not yet recognized. Instead of spending his mental energy on resentment toward the bank, Franklin found himself becoming more observant about changes happening in his industry and more open to possibilities he had not previously considered. The breakthrough came during the third week of Franklin's blessing practice when a customer named George Morrison brought his electric vehicle to the shop for service. George explained that while his car required less maintenance than traditional vehicles, he was having difficulty finding qualified technicians who understood electric vehicle systems and could perform the specialized maintenance that electric cars did require. As Franklin listened to George describe his frustration with the limited options for electric vehicle service, he began to realize that the bank's concerns about the future of automotive repair might actually point toward an opportunity rather than a threat. Instead of competing with other traditional repair shops, Franklin could position his business at the forefront of the transition to electric and hybrid vehicles by becoming certified in electric vehicle maintenance and repair. Franklin spent the next several days researching certification programs for electric vehicle technology and discovered that there was indeed a growing demand for qualified electric vehicle technicians that far exceeded the current supply. The training required would be expensive and time-consuming, but Franklin realized that his years of experience with traditional automotive systems would actually be an advantage in learning the new technology, because many electric vehicle problems involved conventional components like brakes, suspension, and cooling systems. The most remarkable aspect of this new direction was that it required much less capital investment than Franklin's original expansion plan. Instead of purchasing additional real estate and equipment, Franklin could become certified in electric vehicle repair and gradually add specialized tools and diagnostic equipment as his business in this area grew. The rejection from the bank had actually protected him from taking on substantial debt just as the industry was beginning to shift in a direction that would make his new specialization extremely valuable. Within 6 months, Franklin had completed his electric vehicle certification and begun marketing his shop as one of the few facilities in the region qualified to service electric and hybrid vehicles. The demand for his services exceeded his capacity almost immediately, and Franklin found himself turning away customers and considering hiring additional technicians specifically trained in electric vehicle technology. The financial success of Franklin's new direction surpassed what he had projected for his original expansion plan, but what impressed him most was how effortlessly the transition had occurred once he stopped fighting against the rejection and started blessing it as guidance. Franklin often reflected that if the bank had approved his loan, he would have committed himself to a path that would have become increasingly difficult as the automotive industry continued to evolve. Florence Scovel Shin taught that every rejection contains within it the seed of a redirection toward something that serves our highest good more perfectly than what we originally wanted. The shadow of rejection becomes a teacher when we bless it rather than resist it, and allow it to guide us toward opportunities that are aligned with the larger intelligence that governs our lives. The 7 primary shadow teachers that Florence identified in financial matters each carry specific gifts that only become available when we embrace them rather than fight against them. Rejection teaches discernment and redirects us toward our true audience. Loss teaches detachment and opens us to receive from unexpected sources. Failure teaches humility and innovation. Delay teaches patience and divine timing. Setbacks teach resilience and creative problem-solving. Unexpected expenses teach trust in unlimited supply. Criticism teaches refinement and authenticity. While you sleep tonight, your subconscious mind is learning to recognize these shadow teachers when they appear in your financial life and to receive their gifts rather than resist their presence. You are developing the spiritual maturity to see that what appears to be working against your prosperity is often working for your prosperity in ways that your conscious mind cannot yet understand. Your deeper mind already knows that every apparent obstacle contains creative potential, and every disappointment carries redirection towards something better than what you originally planned. As you rest, these knowings are being activated and integrated so that when you encounter financial shadows in your waking life, you will automatically bless them and remain open to receive their teachings. Tomorrow, you may find yourself responding to any financial challenges with curiosity rather than resistance. And this shift will immediately begin to reveal the gifts and opportunities that are hidden within what previously appeared to be problems. The shadow teachers are already preparing to reveal themselves to you as allies and guides on your path to greater prosperity than you ever could have achieved while trying to avoid difficulties. Florence Scovel Shinn discovered that the universe communicates with us through signs and synchronicities that appear not only during times of ease and expansion, but especially during periods of financial challenge and apparent contraction. She taught that learning to read signs in both the dark and the light was essential for navigating our prosperity journey with confidence and trust, even when external circumstances seemed discouraging. Most people are trained to look for positive signs only when things are going well in their financial life. But Florence found that some of the most important guidance comes through what she called signs in the shadow, apparent problems or setbacks that are actually divine course corrections, steering us toward greater abundance than we could have achieved on our original path. The ability to read signs in all circumstances became a life-changing skill for a woman named Rosemary, who was 59 years old when she lost nearly her entire inheritance in what appeared to be a sound investment that turned out to be fraudulent. Rosemary had inherited $87,000 from her Aunt Margaret, who had lived frugally her entire life, and left the money to Rosemary with the hope that it would provide security for her retirement years. Rosemary lived in a modest apartment in Sacramento, California, where she worked as a librarian at the local community college. She had never been married and had no children, so the inheritance represented the only substantial nest egg she would have for her retirement beyond her modest pension and Social Security benefits. Rosemary was naturally cautious with money and spent several months researching investment options before deciding to entrust the inheritance to what appeared to be a reputable investment firm. The investment advisor who handled Rosemary's account was a well-dressed man in his 40s named Stephen Walsh, who had an impressive office in a downtown high-rise building and credentials from several financial organizations. Stephen explained to Rosemary that he specialized in conservative investments for retirees and widows and assured her that her money would be safely invested in a diversified portfolio of bonds and dividend-paying stocks that would provide steady income while preserving her principal. For the first year, everything appeared to be progressing exactly as Stephen had promised. Rosemary received quarterly statements showing modest but steady growth in her account value, along with dividend payments that were deposited directly into her checking account. Stephen called her periodically to review her portfolio and always spoke confidently about the performance of her investments and the bright prospects for continued growth. The devastating revelation came on a Tuesday morning in September, when Rosemary received a phone call from an investigator with the Securities and Exchange Commission informing her that Stephen Walsh and his firm were under investigation for operating what appeared to be an elaborate Ponzi scheme. The investigator explained that Stephen had been using money from new investors to pay fictitious returns to existing clients while secretly transferring much of the actual investment funds to his personal accounts. Rosemary felt physically sick as the investigator explained that preliminary estimates suggested that clients had lost approximately $12 million and that it was unlikely that more than 10 or 15% of the stolen money would ever be recovered. In a matter of minutes, Rosemary's financial security had vanished, and she faced the prospect of working indefinitely instead of retiring as she had planned. The emotional impact of this betrayal was devastating not only because of the financial loss, but because Rosemary felt foolish for having trusted someone who had seemed so professional and credible. She had prided herself on being careful with money, and the fact that she had been deceived so completely felt like a personal failure that shook her confidence in her own judgment about everything. For several weeks after learning about the fraud, Rosemary struggled with depression and anxiety about her future. She found herself unable to concentrate at work and had difficulty sleeping as her mind raced with worries about how she would support herself in her later years. The shame of having lost her aunt's inheritance felt almost worse than the practical concerns about money, because Rosemary felt that she had betrayed her aunt's trust and her own responsibility as a steward of family resources. It was during this darkest period that Rosemary discovered Florence Scovel Shinn's teaching about finding signs and guidance even in the midst of apparent disaster. A colleague at the library who noticed Rosemary's distress recommended a book that explained how to look for divine redirection within financial setbacks, and Rosemary decided to try the practices described, even though she felt little hope that anything could redeem such a devastating loss. The practice that Rosemary adopted involved spending 15 minutes each morning sitting quietly and asking to be shown any signs or guidance that might be hidden within her financial loss. Instead of focusing on her anger toward Stephen Walsh or her worry about the future, Rosemary trained herself to look for any positive developments or unexpected opportunities that had emerged since the fraud was discovered. At first, this practice felt forced and artificial because Rosemary could see nothing positive about losing her inheritance. But she persisted because she needed something to hold on to during this difficult time. Gradually, Rosemary began to notice small things that she had previously overlooked, including the support and kindness she was receiving from friends and colleagues who had learned about her situation. The first significant sign came during Rosemary's third week of looking for guidance, when she received a phone call from her supervisor at the library informing her about a new federal grant program that would fund expanded literacy services for adult learners. The supervisor explained that the college had been awarded a substantial grant and needed to hire additional staff to coordinate and deliver the new programs. What made this opportunity particularly relevant was that the position being offered was specifically designed for someone with Rosemary's background and experience in library science and adult education. The salary being offered was nearly double what Rosemary was currently earning, and the position came with enhanced retirement benefits that would significantly improve her long-term financial security. The timing of this opportunity struck Rosemary as more than coincidental, because the grant application had been submitted months before her investment fraud was discovered. But the award notification came at the exact moment when she most needed additional income to compensate for her lost inheritance. As Rosemary considered whether to apply for the position, she began to see it as a potential sign that the universe was providing an alternative path to financial security. The interview process for the grant-funded position revealed another layer of what appeared to be divine orchestration. During the interview, Rosemary learned that the position would involve developing literacy programs specifically for older adults who had never had the opportunity to complete their education. This work felt deeply meaningful to Rosemary because it connected her own experience of financial vulnerability with her professional skills and her desire to help others overcome challenges in their lives. When Rosemary was offered the position, she realized that accepting it would actually leave her in a better financial situation than she had been in before the investment fraud occurred. The increased salary and improved benefits would allow her to rebuild her retirement savings more quickly than would have been possible with her previous income, combined with the modest returns from her inheritance. But the most significant sign that this redirection was divinely orchestrated came when Rosemary learned more about the adult learners she would be serving through the new literacy programs. Many of them were women in their 50s and 60s who had experienced financial setbacks similar to her own and were returning to education as a way to improve their employment prospects and regain a sense of purpose and dignity. Rosemary began to see that her own experience of financial loss had prepared her to understand and empathize with the students she would be serving in ways that would not have been possible if she had remained comfortably secure with her inheritance. The fraud that had initially seemed like pure disaster was revealing itself as preparation for work that was more meaningful and ultimately more financially rewarding than anything she had previously imagined. Within 6 months of starting her new position, Rosemary had developed innovative literacy programs that were so successful they attracted additional funding from both government and private sources. Her reputation as an expert in adult literacy education led to consulting opportunities and speaking engagements that provided supplemental income beyond her already improved salary. The transformation in Rosemary's understanding of how divine guidance works came through recognizing that signs appear not only in pleasant circumstances, but especially in challenging ones, when we need redirection the most. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that what appears to be working against us is often working for us in ways that only become clear when we stop resisting long enough to see the larger pattern that is unfolding. The 3 levels of signs that Florence identified operate simultaneously in our financial lives, but require different types of awareness to recognize and interpret correctly. Micro signs appear as small synchronicities and intuitive nudges that guide our daily decisions about money and opportunities. Medium signs manifest as unexpected contacts opportunities or resources that appear when we need them most. Macro signs reveal themselves as major life redirections that initially appear disruptive, but ultimately lead to greater abundance and fulfillment. While you sleep tonight, your ability to recognize and interpret signs in both challenging and supportive circumstances is being enhanced and refined. Your subconscious mind is learning to see patterns and connections that your conscious mind might miss, and to trust that guidance is always available even when external circumstances appear discouraging. Your deeper awareness already knows that every experience contains information about your next steps toward greater prosperity, and that the universe is constantly communicating with you through the language of signs and synchronicities. As you rest, this natural ability to read divine guidance is being activated so that you will automatically notice and respond to the signs that are already appearing in your financial life. Tomorrow, you may find yourself naturally noticing connections and opportunities that you previously would have overlooked, and this enhanced awareness will guide you toward prosperity that flows from your alignment with divine intelligence rather than from your efforts to force particular outcomes. The signs are already present in your life, waiting to be recognized and followed toward the abundance that is your spiritual birthright. Florence Scovel Shinn discovered that divine timing operates on principles that are fundamentally different from human expectations about when prosperity should manifest in our lives. She taught that what we perceive as delays or periods of stagnation are often essential phases of integration where the universe is organizing circumstances and preparing us to receive abundance in ways that will be sustainable and aligned with our highest good. This understanding of divine timing as a process of integration rather than simple cause and effect revolutionized how Florence approached her own prosperity challenges and became one of her most important teachings for students who were frustrated by the apparent slowness of their financial transformations. She learned that trying to force manifestation according to human timelines often interfered with the deeper processes that were necessary for lasting abundance. The wisdom of divine timing became profoundly clear in the life of a man named Harold, who was 56 years old when he began applying Florence Scovel Shinn's principles to a business that seemed to be perpetually on the verge of either breakthrough or failure. Harold owned a small publishing company that specialized in books about local history and regional culture in the Pacific Northwest, and while his books were well regarded and won several awards, the financial success had been elusive. Harold had started his publishing company 12 years earlier after leaving a corporate marketing position that had provided a comfortable salary but left him feeling empty and unfulfilled. He had always been passionate about history and storytelling and dreamed of creating books that would preserve the stories of small communities and forgotten people whose lives had shaped the character of the region where he lived. The publishing business operated out of Harold's home office in a restored farmhouse outside of Olympia, Washington, where he lived with his wife Carol, who worked as a nurse at the local hospital. Their combined income was sufficient to maintain their modest lifestyle, but Harold's publishing venture had never generated enough profit to justify the long hours and emotional energy he invested in it. Over the years, Harold had published 43 books, including collections of oral histories, photographic documentaries of vanishing landscapes, and biographical accounts of pioneering families. The books received positive reviews in regional publications, and several had been selected for local book clubs and historical society events, but sales remained disappointingly low, and Harold often questioned whether he should abandon the business and return to conventional employment. The frustration Harold experienced was intensified by the fact that he had been studying metaphysical principles for several years and had been affirming abundance and visualizing success for his publishing company without seeing significant improvement in the financial results. Harold sometimes wondered if his inability to manifest prosperity meant that he was not applying the principles correctly, or that perhaps the universe was trying to tell him that he should pursue a different path. It was during a particularly discouraging period when Harold was considering closing the publishing company that he discovered Florence Scovel Shinn's teaching about divine timing and the necessity of allowing integration periods where external manifestation appears to be stalled while deeper preparation is occurring. This perspective offered Harold a completely different way of understanding his experience and gave him hope that the years of apparent struggle might actually be serving a purpose he had not yet recognized. Harold began to practice what Florence called blessing the gestational period, where instead of fighting against the slow pace of his business growth, he would consciously appreciate the time he was being given to develop his skills, refine his vision, and build the foundation for sustainable success. Each morning, Harold would sit in his office, surrounded by the books he had published, and speak words of gratitude for the opportunity to do work that felt meaningful even when it was not yet financially rewarding. This shift in Harold's attitude toward the timing of his success created space for him to notice aspects of his business that were actually progressing, even though the financial results had not yet reflected that progress. Harold realized that over the 12 years of publishing books, he had developed relationships with historians, librarians, booksellers, and community leaders throughout the Pacific Northwest that represented a valuable network of connections and a solid reputation for quality work. Harold also began to see that each book he had published had contributed to his understanding of what types of stories resonated most deeply with readers and which marketing approaches were most effective for reaching people who were genuinely interested in regional history. The years that had felt like failure from a financial perspective had actually been a period of education and relationship building that was preparing him for a level of success that would not have been possible earlier in his journey. The breakthrough that validated Harold's new understanding of divine timing came during his 13th year of publishing, when he received an unexpected phone call from a program director at Oregon Public Broadcasting, who had been familiar with Harold's work for several years. The program director explained that the network was developing a documentary series about the cultural history of the Pacific Northwest and was looking for a publishing partner who could create companion books for each episode. The opportunity that Oregon Public Broadcasting presented was beyond anything Harold had imagined during the years when he was struggling to sell a few hundred copies of each book. The network was prepared to order 10,000 copies of each companion book with the possibility of additional printings if the documentary series was successful. The financial terms of the partnership would generate more revenue for Harold's company in 1 year than he had earned in the previous 5 years combined. What struck Harold as particularly significant about this opportunity was the timing and the way it built upon everything he had learned and created during the years that had felt unsuccessful. The network had specifically sought him out because of his reputation for thorough research, high-quality production, and his deep knowledge of Pacific Northwest history, all of which had been developed through the books that had seemed financially disappointing at the time they were published. The documentary partnership also required Harold to draw upon the network of relationships he had built with historians, museums, and historical societies throughout the region. The contacts that had generated modest sales for his individual books became invaluable resources for the comprehensive research and community outreach that the documentary project required. As Harold worked on the first companion book for the documentary series, he reflected on how the years of apparent struggle had actually been a period of preparation that was essential for his ability to handle the larger opportunity that was now presenting itself. If the breakthrough had come earlier, Harold would not have had the experience, knowledge, or network of relationships necessary to execute the project successfully. The success of the first documentary and companion book exceeded everyone's expectations and led to additional partnerships with other networks and cultural organizations. Within 2 years, Harold's publishing company had grown from a struggling one-person operation to a thriving business that employed 6 people and had a national distribution network for its books about regional American history. Harold often told people that the most important lesson he learned from his experience was that divine timing includes periods of apparent delay that are actually periods of preparation and integration. Florence Scovel Shin taught that the universe knows when we are ready to receive what we have been asking for, and that our role is to continue developing our abilities and maintaining our vision even when external evidence suggests that nothing is happening. The integration periods that divine timing requires serve multiple purposes in our prosperity journey, including allowing us to develop the skills and wisdom necessary to handle increased abundance, building the relationships and reputation that will support sustainable success, refining our understanding of what we truly want to create, and releasing attachments to specific outcomes that might limit our ability to receive something better than what we originally planned. Florence discovered that people who learned to bless and appreciate the gestational periods in their financial lives experienced much more satisfying and lasting prosperity than those who tried to force manifestation according to their own impatient timelines. The integration allows for what she called organic abundance that grows naturally from our authentic gifts and purpose rather than being artificially created through willpower and manipulation. While you sleep tonight, your subconscious mind is learning to trust the natural rhythms of prosperity and to see apparent delays as opportunities for deeper preparation rather than evidence that your goals are not meant to manifest. You are developing patience that is not passive waiting but active preparation for receiving abundance that is perfectly timed to serve your highest good. Your deeper wisdom already knows that everything is unfolding in perfect timing, and that the experiences you are having now are preparing you to receive and manage prosperity in ways that will bring lasting fulfillment rather than temporary satisfaction. As you rest, this trust in divine timing is being integrated into your consciousness so that you can maintain faith and continue taking inspired action even when external results have not yet appeared. Tomorrow, you may find yourself naturally feeling more patient with the process of manifestation and more appreciative of the growth and learning that are occurring even when financial results are not yet visible. This shift in your relationship with timing will actually accelerate your prosperity because it removes the energetic resistance that blocks the natural flow of abundance into your life. Florence Scovel Shinn discovered that one of the most powerful accelerants for financial transformation was the creation of what she called witnesses of wholeness, a community of souls who supported each other not only during periods of abundance and success, but especially during times of apparent lack and challenge. She taught that when we gather with others who understand the principle of blessing, both light and shadow, we create a collective field that makes manifestation easier and more sustainable for everyone involved. This understanding arose from Florence's observation that her students who practiced these principles in isolation often struggled with doubt and discouragement when they encountered setbacks, while those who were part of a supportive community were able to maintain their faith and continue their practices even during difficult periods. She realized that witnessing each other's total experience, rather than just the positive parts, created a type of spiritual synergy that amplified the power of individual practice. The transformative power of witnesses of wholeness became beautifully evident in the life of a woman named Gladys, who was 63 years old when she found herself facing simultaneous financial pressures that threatened to overwhelm her carefully managed retirement plans. Gladys had been widowed for 7 years and had done everything right according to conventional financial advice. But a series of unexpected expenses and market fluctuations had significantly reduced her nest egg at a time when she could least afford such losses. Gladys lived in a small condominium in a retirement community outside of Phoenix, Arizona, where she had moved after her husband's death to be closer to her daughter and grandchildren. She had always been meticulous about budgeting and had worked with a financial planner to create what seemed like a secure plan for her retirement years. The plan had been working well until a combination of medical expenses not covered by insurance and a significant drop in the value of her investment portfolio created a financial crisis she had not anticipated. The medical expenses came from a series of dental procedures that Gladys needed after developing complications from medication she was taking for arthritis. The dental work required by specialists and was not covered by her Medicare supplement insurance cost $14,600 that Gladys had to pay from her savings. Around the same time, the stock market experienced a significant correction that reduced the value of her investment portfolio by 32%. The combination of these financial hits left Gladys in a position where her monthly expenses exceeded her monthly income from Social Security and her reduced investment portfolio. She faced the prospect of either finding ways to increase her income or making dramatic cuts to her lifestyle, including possibly selling her condominium and moving to a less expensive living situation that would take her farther away from her family. Gladys had always been a private person who prided herself on her independence, and the idea of discussing her financial problems with others felt embarrassing and vulnerable. She spent several weeks trying to solve the situation on her own by researching part-time job opportunities for people her age and looking into more affordable housing options. But every solution she explored seemed to involve significant sacrifices that would diminish her quality of life. It was during this period of stress and isolation that Gladys attended a lecture at her community center about spiritual approaches to financial challenges. The speaker discussed Florence Scovel Shinn's teaching about blessing both abundance and apparent lack, and mentioned the importance of having spiritual witnesses who could support each other through all phases of the prosperity journey. After the lecture, Gladys approached the speaker, a woman named Patricia, who lived in the same retirement community, and asked if there might be others who would be interested in forming a small group to study and practice these principles together. Patricia explained that she had been hoping to find like-minded people who were interested in applying spiritual principles to practical challenges, and suggested that they post a notice in the community newsletter to see if others might be interested. The response to their notice exceeded both Gladys and Patricia's expectations, and within 2 weeks, they had 8 women who wanted to be part of what they decided to call their Prosperity Circle. The group included women ranging in age from 58 to 74 who were dealing with various financial challenges, including divorce, late-in-life career changes, caring for elderly parents with limited resources, and adjusting to fixed incomes that seemed increasingly inadequate. What made this group different from typical support groups was their commitment to witnessing and blessing each other's complete financial experience, rather than focusing only on problems or only on positive thinking. During their weekly meetings, each woman would share both the challenges and the blessings she had experienced during the previous week, and the group would practice collectively blessing whatever each person was experiencing. For Gladys, the most transformative aspect of the group was discovering that she was not alone in facing financial uncertainty, and that other women she respected were dealing with similar challenges while maintaining their dignity and sense of purpose. The shame and embarrassment she had felt about her financial problems began to dissolve as she realized that these difficulties were a normal part of life transitions rather than evidence of personal failure. The practical support that emerged from the Prosperity Circle took forms that none of the women had anticipated when they first began meeting. As they shared their individual challenges and resources, they discovered numerous ways to help each other reduce expenses and increase income through sharing skills, services, and connections that each woman possessed. Gladys discovered that 2 other women in the group were also facing dental expenses that were not covered by insurance, and together They were able to negotiate group rates with specialists that reduced everyone's costs significantly. Another member of the group, who had been a business owner before retirement, offered to help Gladys explore options for generating income from home, using skills Gladys had developed during her working years but had never considered monetizing. The most significant opportunity that came through the group connections was when Patricia mentioned that her daughter, who worked for a large corporation, was looking for experienced people to provide remote customer service support for overflow periods during busy seasons. The position offered flexible scheduling that would allow Gladys to work as much or as little as she wanted, and the hourly pay was substantially higher than other part-time opportunities she had been considering. Working 15 to 20 hours per week in the remote customer service position provided Gladys with enough additional income to stabilize her financial situation without requiring her to make major lifestyle changes or move away from her family. But more importantly, the support and witnessing she received from the Prosperity Circle had transformed her relationship with financial challenges from something she had to face alone to something she could navigate with the help of a community that understood both the practical and spiritual dimensions of prosperity. Within a year, the Prosperity Circle had grown to include 12 women and had become known throughout the retirement community as a resource for people facing financial transitions. Several members of the group had experienced significant improvements in their financial situations. But what impressed everyone most was how much more resilient and resourceful they had all become through the practice of witnessing and blessing each other's total experience. Gladys often reflected that the financial crisis that had initially felt overwhelming had actually been the catalyst for her discovering a type of community and support that enriched her life far beyond the immediate practical benefits. The principle of witnesses of wholeness that Florence Scovel Shin taught had created relationships that provided not only financial solutions, but also emotional and spiritual sustenance that made the challenges of aging feel much more manageable. Florence taught that when we witness each other's complete experience, including both the successes and the struggles, we create what she called a field of divine possibility, where solutions and opportunities can emerge that would not be available to any individual working alone. This collective field is particularly powerful when it includes people who understand the principle of blessing challenges as well as celebrating victories. The witnesses of wholeness that support our prosperity journey serve multiple functions, including providing practical resources and connections that we would not have access to individually, offering emotional support that helps us maintain faith during difficult periods, reflecting back our strengths and capabilities when we are feeling discouraged, and holding the vision of our success when our own faith is temporarily shaken. Florence discovered that people who were part of authentic spiritual community experienced more rapid and sustainable financial transformations than those who tried to practice these principles in isolation. The collective energy of a group that is committed to blessing both light and shadow creates an amplification effect that makes manifestation easier and more enjoyable for everyone involved. While you sleep tonight, you are being connected to the invisible network of souls around the world who are practicing these same principles of blessing, both abundance and apparent lack. Your energy field is being strengthened by the collective intention of thousands of people who understand that true prosperity includes embracing rather than avoiding the challenging aspects of our financial journey. You do not need to physically meet these witnesses to benefit from their support, because the connection occurs on the level of consciousness where all souls who are aligned with divine love and wisdom are naturally united. As you rest tonight, you are both receiving support from this collective field and contributing your own energy to strengthen it for others who need encouragement and guidance. Tomorrow, you may find yourself naturally drawn to connect with others who share your understanding of prosperity as a spiritual journey rather than merely a material pursuit. And these connections will provide both practical benefits and deeper fulfillment than you could experience while trying to navigate your financial life in isolation. The witnesses of wholeness are already present in your life, waiting to be recognized and welcomed into conscious relationship with your prosperity journey. As you continue to rest and allow these teachings to penetrate the deepest levels of your consciousness, we arrive now at the culmination of everything that Florence Scovel Shinn discovered about the true nature of prosperity and how it flows into our lives when we learn to bless both the light and the shadow of our financial experience. You have heard about the power of complete acceptance and how saying yes to what appears opens doorways to what is emerging. You have received the understanding that our identity as divine balancers who can receive from all directions is more important than our circumstances being perfect. You have learned about the shadow teachers that appear as rejection, loss, failure, and disappointment, but carry gifts that can only be received when we bless them rather than resist them. You have discovered how to read signs in both challenging and supportive circumstances, and how to trust divine timing even when manifestation appears to be delayed. You have understood the power of witnesses of wholeness who support each other through every aspect of the prosperity journey. Now you will receive the story that seals and integrates all of these teachings through the experience of a woman who faced the ultimate test of everything Florence Scovel Shinn taught about blessing both light and shadow as pathways to abundance. This story will anchor these principles so deeply in your consciousness that they will become part of your natural response to any financial challenge you may encounter in your waking life. Her name was Edith, and she was 57 years old when what seemed like her entire world collapsed in the space of 6 devastating months that tested every belief she had ever held about fairness, justice, and the possibility of divine providence in human affairs. Edith had been married to her husband Robert for 31 years, and they had built what appeared to be a secure and comfortable life in a small city in upstate New York, where Robert worked as a civil engineer and Edith taught elementary school. Their life together had been marked by steady progress and careful planning that reflected the values they both shared about working hard, saving money, and building something lasting for themselves and their 2 children, who were now adults with families of their own. Robert and Edith owned their home outright after paying off their mortgage early and had accumulated substantial savings in retirement accounts that would allow them to maintain their lifestyle when they stopped working in a few years. The first catastrophe struck on a Tuesday morning in February when Robert collapsed at his office and was rushed to the hospital, where doctors discovered that he had suffered a massive stroke that left him unable to speak or move the entire left side of his body. The medical team explained to Edith that while Robert had survived the initial stroke, his prognosis for recovery was uncertain, and he would require extensive rehabilitation and possibly long-term care, depending on how much function he might regain. Edith spent the next 3 months dividing her time between teaching her classes during the day and spending every evening and weekend at the hospital and rehabilitation center where Robert was receiving intensive therapy. The medical bills were substantial even with their health insurance coverage, and Edith found herself dealing with complex paperwork and insurance claims while trying to maintain hope that Robert would eventually recover enough to return home. The second blow came in May, when Robert's condition deteriorated suddenly due to complications from a blood clot that caused another stroke, leaving him completely incapacitated and requiring full-time nursing care. The doctors informed Edith that Robert would need to be transferred to a long-term care facility because his medical needs were beyond what could be provided at home, even with professional assistance. The cost of the specialized care facility where Robert needed to live was $4,800 per month, and while their insurance covered some of the expenses, Edith realized that their savings would be depleted within 2 years if Robert's condition did not improve. The emotional devastation of watching her husband of 31 years become increasingly unresponsive was compounded by the financial stress of knowing that everything they had worked for was being consumed by medical expenses. The third catastrophe occurred in August, when Edith received notice that the school district where she had taught for 19 years was facing budget cuts that would eliminate her position, along with several others, at the end of the current school year. The timing could not have been worse because Edith was counting on her salary and benefits to help cover Robert's care expenses, and she knew that finding another teaching position at her age would be extremely difficult, especially given the demands of caring for Robert. By September, Edith felt as if she were drowning in circumstances that seemed designed to destroy every aspect of security and stability she had spent decades building. She was facing the prospect of losing her income while her husband's care expenses continued to mount, and their savings dwindled toward nothing. The house that had been their sanctuary now felt like a burden because she could barely afford the utilities and maintenance while spending most of her time at the care facility with Robert. It was during this darkest period when Edith felt that she had reached the absolute limit of what she could endure, that her sister brought her a book by Florence Scovel, Shin, and suggested that perhaps spiritual principles might offer some guidance that practical solutions had not provided. Edith was initially resistant to the idea that blessing her catastrophic circumstances could possibly help her situation, but she was desperate enough to try anything that might bring some peace to her tortured mind. The practice that Edith began involved sitting beside Robert's bed each evening after the nursing staff had finished their rounds and speaking words that felt almost blasphemous given the magnitude of their losses. She would place one hand on Robert's forehead and one hand on her own heart and say, "I bless this stroke as part of our sacred journey, and I bless the loss of my job as redirection toward my highest good, and I bless these financial challenges as preparation for abundance I cannot yet imagine." For the first 2 weeks, this practice felt like she was mocking her own pain and Robert's condition. But Edith continued because something deep inside her recognized that fighting against their circumstances was only adding mental and emotional suffering to the physical and financial challenges they were already facing. Gradually, she began to notice that the blessing practice was creating a sense of peace and acceptance that allowed her to be more present with Robert instead of being consumed by worry about the future. The first sign that something was shifting came when Edith mentioned to one of Robert's nurses that she was a teacher who would be losing her job at the end of the school year. The nurse, whose name was Jennifer, explained that her mother was the director of a private tutoring center that specialized in helping children with learning disabilities and that they were always looking for experienced teachers who could work flexible hours with individual students. When Edith met with Jennifer's mother, she discovered that the tutoring center paid significantly more per hour than her teaching salary and would allow her to schedule her work around Robert's care needs. The center also offered the possibility of developing specialized programs for children with particular learning challenges, which appealed to Edith because she had always been most fulfilled when working with students who needed extra support and creativity in their education. The financial opportunity at the tutoring center was encouraging, but the more profound shift came when Edith began to see Robert's condition through the lens of blessing rather than tragedy. Instead of focusing on what Robert had lost, Edith began to notice moments of connection and awareness that suggested his spirit was still present, even though his ability to communicate was severely limited. During their evening blessing practice, Edith began to sense that Robert was somehow participating in the prayers, even though he could not speak or move voluntarily. She noticed that his breathing would become deeper and more relaxed when she spoke the words of blessing, and sometimes she felt certain that he was trying to squeeze her hand in response to particular phrases. The breakthrough that transformed Edith's understanding of their entire situation came on a cold December evening when she was sitting beside Robert's bed, feeling overwhelmed by the approaching anniversary of his first stroke. As she began her usual blessing practice, Robert's eyes suddenly focused on her face with a clarity she had not seen since before his illness, and for just a moment, his mouth formed what appeared to be the beginning of a smile. In that instant, Edith realized that her months of blessing their catastrophic circumstances had not only brought practical solutions, like the tutoring opportunity, but had also opened her heart to receive whatever gifts were hidden within their tragedy. She understood that Robert's condition was not just something happening to them, but something they were experiencing together as part of a spiritual journey that neither of them could have chosen, but both of them could bless. The financial abundance that began to flow into Edith's life exceeded anything she could have imagined while she was focused on their losses. The tutoring work led to consulting opportunities with school districts that were developing programs for special needs students, and Edith found herself earning more money than she ever had as a classroom teacher while working fewer hours and having more flexibility to care for Robert. More importantly, Edith discovered that the experience of blessing, both the devastating losses and the unexpected opportunities, had fundamentally transformed her relationship with uncertainty and challenge. She no longer feared financial setbacks or unexpected changes because she had learned through direct experience that every circumstance contained the potential for growth and blessing when approached with the right spiritual attitude. The most remarkable aspect of Edith's story was that as she became more skilled at blessing both light and shadow in her own life, Robert's condition began to stabilize and even show modest improvements that surprised his medical team. While he never regained his speech or full mobility, Robert became more responsive and engaged, and the quality of their connection deepened in ways that transcended his physical limitations. 3 years after Robert's first stroke, Edith had not only maintained their financial stability, but had created a more abundant and meaningful life than they had experienced before his illness. The tutoring center had grown into a thriving practice that served hundreds of children and families, and Edith had become a recognized expert in adaptive education techniques that helped children overcome significant learning challenges. When people asked Edith how she had managed to find so much blessing in such devastating circumstances, she would explain that the key was learning to trust that every experience, no matter how painful, contained gifts that could only be received through wholehearted acceptance rather than resistance. She often said that Robert's stroke had been the most difficult and most transformative experience of her life, and that she would not trade the wisdom and compassion it had taught her, even if she could undo his illness. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the ultimate test of our spiritual understanding comes when we are faced with circumstances that appear to offer no redeeming value and challenge us to find blessing in what seems like pure loss. Edith's story demonstrates that even the most devastating experiences can become doorways to greater abundance and deeper meaning when we have the courage to bless them rather than resist them. The principle that Edith embodied through her experience is that prosperity is not the absence of challenge, but the ability to receive blessing from every circumstance, whether it appears positive or negative. This understanding creates an unshakable foundation for abundance because it does not depend on external conditions being favorable, but draws from an internal source of wisdom and acceptance that can transform any situation. And now you will receive the same seal that Edith received through her willingness to bless both the light and the shadow of her experience. You do not need to face such extreme circumstances to access this wisdom, because the principle works equally well with smaller challenges and everyday difficulties. Simply learning to bless rather than resist whatever appears in your financial life will open you to receive abundance that flows from your alignment with divine love rather than from your efforts to control outcomes. Breathe deeply with me now, even if you are sleeping, because your body knows, and the moment of the final decree has arrived, and it is not your decree, but the decree. And what has always been true is only being spoken through you. Everything you have heard tonight has been preparing you for this moment when the words of power seal these teachings into the very fabric of your consciousness, where they will continue to work even when your mind has forgotten what you heard. Even if you are sleeping, something in you is awake and has been awake throughout this entire teaching, receiving every word and integrating every principle into the deepest levels of your being. This part of you never sleeps and never doubts and never forgets what is true about your divine nature and your capacity to receive abundance from every direction and in every circumstance. This awakened part of you knows that you are not someone who must choose between light and shadow, but someone who blesses both as sacred aspects of your journey toward ever greater prosperity and spiritual fulfillment. You are not someone who can only receive when conditions are perfect, but someone who draws blessing from whatever life offers, because you understand that divine intelligence works through every experience to bring you exactly what you need for your highest good. Breathe with me now, and allow these words of power to enter the very center of your being, where they will remain as permanent reminders of your true nature and your unlimited capacity to receive. As you breathe in, you are receiving the essence of everything Florence Scovel Shinn discovered about blessing both light and shadow, and as you breathe out, you are releasing any remaining resistance to your own abundant nature. Place your attention now on the rhythm of your breathing and allow each breath to deepen your acceptance of these truths. You do not need to understand how these principles work, but only to allow them to work through you reorganizing your consciousness and preparing you to experience prosperity that flows from your wholehearted embrace of everything life brings to you. I will now speak the words that seal these teachings into your consciousness, and you do not need to repeat them or remember them because they are being spoken directly to the part of you that creates your reality through the power of divine decree. Simply receive these words as gifts that are already yours and allow them to anchor in your awareness as permanent reminders of who you truly are. It is finished. The separation between what you call good and what you call bad in your financial life is finished because you now know that both serve your highest prosperity when blessed rather than resisted. The struggle against challenging circumstances is finished because you now understand that every experience contains the seeds of greater abundance when approached with divine wisdom. The fear that you might not receive what you need is finished because you now know that you are a natural receiver who draws from unlimited supply through every channel that divine love opens for you. It is done. Your identity as someone who can only prosper under perfect conditions is done because you have become someone who receives blessing from all directions and in all seasons. Your belief that you must figure out how abundance will come is done because you now trust divine intelligence to provide exactly what you need in ways that surpass your human understanding. Your resistance to any aspect of your financial journey is done because you now bless both the expansion and the contraction as sacred movements in the dance of divine prosperity, and it cannot be otherwise. Your true nature as a beloved child of infinite abundance cannot be changed by any external circumstance because it exists in the realm of eternal truth that transcends all temporary appearances. Your capacity to receive from both light and shadow cannot be diminished because it springs from divine love that uses every experience to bless you. Your worthiness to prosper in every area of your life cannot be questioned because it was established before you were born and will remain after every challenge has been transformed into blessing. It is finished, it is done, and it cannot be otherwise. I am a natural receiver who draws abundance from every direction and every circumstance because I know that divine love works through all experiences to bless me. I have always been supported by unlimited supply, even when I could not see the channels through which it was flowing. I have always been guided toward my highest good, even when the path appeared to lead through difficulty. I have always been held in divine love, even when my human understanding could not comprehend the perfection of what was unfolding in my life. I am a natural receiver. I have always received, and it cannot be otherwise. The part of me that doubts my worthiness to prosper is finished because I now know that I was created to be a channel through which divine abundance flows into the world. The part of me that fears loss or lack is done because I now understand that I am connected to unlimited supply that can never be exhausted or diminished. The part of me that resists challenging circumstances is dissolved because I now bless every experience as perfect preparation for greater prosperity than I have yet imagined. I am a natural receiver. I have always received, and it cannot be otherwise. My relationship with money and abundance is now aligned with divine love, which sees no separation between giving and receiving, between having and sharing, between prosperity and generosity. I receive not for myself alone, but as a channel through which divine abundance flows to bless all life. I prosper not through taking from others, but through opening myself to the unlimited supply that seeks expression through willing hearts and open hands. I am a natural receiver. I have always received, and it cannot be otherwise, and so it is sealed in the name of all that is holy and perfect and true. These words have entered the deepest part of your consciousness, where they will continue to work, transforming your relationship with abundance and preparing you to receive prosperity that flows from your alignment with divine love, rather than from your efforts to control or manipulate circumstances. And so it remains throughout all time and all space and all dimensions of your being. You are forever marked as one who blesses both light and shadow, and therefore receives from both as they serve your journey toward ever greater abundance and ever deeper fulfillment. You are forever known as one who says yes to divine will, even when it appears clothed in difficulty, because you trust that divine intelligence always works for your highest good. And it cannot be otherwise, because what has been sealed in truth cannot be unsealed by any temporary appearance or any human opinion or any circumstance that may arise in your external world. You are forever a beloved child of infinite abundance, and this truth will shine through every experience you have from this moment forward. And so it is. You can continue resting now and allowing these truths to integrate into every cell of your body and every aspect of your consciousness. Everything that needed to enter has already entered, and everything that needed to be sealed has already been sealed. When you wake, whether it is in a few minutes or a few hours, you will be different, not because something has been added to you, but because you have remembered what was always true about your divine nature and your unlimited capacity to receive. You will wake knowing that you are someone who blesses both light and shadow, and therefore draws prosperity from every direction. You will wake remembering that you are a natural receiver who has always been supported by unlimited supply, even when you could not see how it was flowing to you. You will wake understanding that every financial challenge is a teacher in disguise, and every apparent setback is a redirection towards something better than what you originally planned. Rest now in the absolute certainty that you are held in divine love that never fails and divine abundance that never runs out. Rest in the knowing that your prosperity is assured, not because you have earned it, but because you are worthy of it simply by virtue of being alive. Rest in the peace that comes from surrendering the need to control how abundance comes to you, and trusting that divine intelligence knows the perfect way to provide everything you need. Rest now. You are safe, you are loved, you are provided for. You are blessed beyond measure, and you always have been, even when you could not feel it or see it or understand it. It is finished. It is done. It cannot be otherwise. And so it is.